This is the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast, episode number 8, Handling Livestock Waste, part 2 of 4, Pastures and Lots. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. We're now joined by Jay Solomon, Extension Educator, to talk about pastures and lots. You know, Jay, I'm not sure exactly what the split is in the state between confinement and pastures, especially for cattle, but I'm sure there are some best management practices.
Right, and that's the split, and you hit it right on the money. A lot of cattle out in there that's of concern to us, especially we go into the winter. The things that we need to look at is back to that same term. Make sure we keep any clean water that we can diverted out from pastures or the holding areas that we may have them in, just to kind of keep it clean, and not add to the pollution and not add to the mud in the pen or in the lot as well. One of the biggest things is if we can just keep them out on ground where it's away from the water systems, any bare ground they may be on, but more than that, if we can keep vegetation on it, take it actually a pasture, not just a dry loafing area. If you do have to put them up, and knowing how I'm up here in the northwest corner, we've had a lot of wet conditions this last month, and going into winter here, concerns about areas being wet and pulling animals off of pasture so they don't track up the pastures really bad. We don't want those feeding areas to be down low, down beside the creek. That's the one place we don't really want to put them up, because that opens up to a lot of problems. We got increased erosion in general. But we also, part of that, what we're losing is manure right straight into the creeks or into waterways. So those are the kind of things we want to try to keep out of there. If we can keep them up high, basically the concept of keep them high and dry is a much better approach to it. I recognize when going into winter, we want to maybe keep them a little bit more sheltered, but need to find some balance with that as you go forward.
So if there are areas where you're able to collect manure, confined spaces, those loafing areas, maybe other places in the barns, what do we do with that manure while we're waiting to find an appropriate time to apply? Because I'm going to guess that wintertime is not the best of times to apply manure outside.
Well, exactly. We don't want to go back to what we said earlier, minimizing applying on snow-covered and frozen ground. Well, one of the key things is collecting that. If is keeping it dry. If we can collect it as a dry product, stack it, keep it somewhat sheltered or covered, is definitely the way to go. So we don't have a lot of extra moisture in there. We don't have that temptation for it to be washed away or leached away from that. It's definitely a place to start from. Or if you've got can set up, just like we do on the confined areas, an area where you actually can contain that water as well, collect it, and do the land application when we need to in the early spring, or yet this fall here, get those areas applied before it actually freezes completely up. It's definitely the thing we need to try to do with that.
And finally, can what you're feeding the animal make a difference in the nutrient runoff?
We're starting to see some influence with that, yes. As we look at what the diets have become, the nutritionists have really looked at what those diets are, what's going into them, and backed off on some of the swine operations and actually on some of the dairies as well. We're seeing reduction in phosphorus in particular. Just the amount of manure going through it, reducing the amount of phosphorus going in the swine. They're adding phytase to it and actually improving the animal's utilization of phosphorus that's in the ration to start with. And so, it basically reduces what's going all the way through the animal. If you put less into it, they're actually absorbing what they need to out of it, and you're passing less of it through. Seeing a little bit of the same thing with some of our nitrogen, just a little bit lower energy diets, really setting those diets in there to match that growth stage, so we're not wasting extra nitrogen, extra energy going through that's not being utilized. And basically looking at really management of those of those diets has a double benefit. One, we're not putting as much through the animal and into the manure that we got to deal with. And the flip side of it is that we are not paying for it up front on the content and going into the feed rations.
Are there things that dairy producers need to consider other than just the manure or affluent waste?
Well, there are a few things that they need to think about, and kind of the best management practice we might have missed was, make sure we're collecting things like your leachate from your silage, your milk house waste, anything else where you've washed down or water's been contaminated by manure needs to be collected and treated basically as manure. One of the ones we see a lot of issues with smaller operations is not thinking about that silage leachate or any compost leachate you've got, letting those two run out. That's a really high concentration of nutrients. Doesn't seem like that much of it, but it can really, if it gets into a waterway, really, I say, carries a lot of nutrient with it for what amount is there, and can cause a lot of damage from the standpoint of the potential for fish kills and that kind of stuff that we're concerned about in water. So making sure we get that containment of those materials is important as well.
Where are they going to put all of this? What kind of cropland or properties?
In most cases, we're putting this back onto cropland, mostly going on to corn and other grain production ground, which are our high nitrogen phosphorus utilization. We also have some that are applying it back to pastures or back to hay ground, which is a really good choice for someone to consider, because that going back to a hay area is where you're collecting the growth off of it, so you're pulling nutrients off in the way of pulling the biomass off. Turn around and put manure back on it. It tends to absorb in very quickly because of all the plant material there and just all the growth going on, and is immediately utilized back into the production of the plant. So really trying to encourage producers to think about having some acreage they can do that with, because it adds flexibility to be able to pull some of that manure out if you have a wet spring, or like this year we have a late harvest and you need to get onto some ground to keep the manure containment in good shape, so you've got extra freeboard in there that you need, or just so you don't run out of time of doing the application sometime in the winter and early spring. Gives you that flexibility, and so definitely want to talk about that opportunity as well.
Jay Solomon is with University of Illinois Extension. You've been listening to the Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast. I'm U of I Extension's Todd Gleason.